Joining me now are two legal experts. Professor Dwight Newman is a professor of law and Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Rights and Constitutional and International Law at the University of Saskatchewan. And Professor Joel Bakan is a public and constitutional law professor at the Allard School of Law at the University of British Columbia. Thank you both for joining me. Professor Bakan, I'll start with you. The new travel restrictions now require 2 COVID tests and a mandatory hotel stay that could cost up to $2,000 per traveler. This makes it harder and more expensive to return to Canada, but not impossible. So since Canadians can still enter Canada, do these restrictions engage our charter rights?
Yeah, they do in some cases and don't in others. The mobility rights of the Charter provide citizens of Canada the right to leave, the right to return, the right to remain in Canada. And those are clearly invoked and engaged by any kind of restrictions on people returning. As well, there are equality provisions that might come into play when people are inordinately impacted by a policy, for example, the $2,000 requirement. If that aligns with some kind of ground of protected discrimination under Section 15 of the Charter, that might be relevant. Section 7 of the Charter provides the right to life, liberty, security of the person. That could be relevant too. The important thing to note, though, is that the way our Constitution is set up, governments can, in fact, restrict rights, any of the rights I just mentioned, so long as the restrictions are reasonable and demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society.
Yeah, so for that question, let me turn to Professor Newman. If our charter rights are engaged here and the question becomes, are these justified limits, what do you think? Do you think that this limit may have gone too far? I know we're still waiting to see the details, but speaking broadly, do you think that this might be an excessive limit when piled on top of the existing requirement to quarantine at home for 14 days?
Well, we certainly need to see the details. But when we come to a question of whether limits on a charter right are reasonable, there is a legal test for that. And some of the components of that test look at things like whether a limit is reasonably tailored and sort of the reasonably proportionate approach to a question. And not a greater limit than necessary on the right to achieve the government's objective. And that's where there might be questions here, because if the quarantining at home combined with tests could work on its own without also requiring someone to spend time in one of these very expensive hotels, it becomes questionable whether that further step is actually a reasonably necessary limit on the right in order to achieve the government objective. And so there's going to be a difficult discussion to be had if this is litigated, which it very well looks like it will be. And there are reasons to doubt that this is all as necessary as it may first be asserted.
So Professor Bakan, what do you think? Do you think that these could be justified limits? And just keep in mind, it seems that there's little evidence from the government that people who have been traveling back into Canada have been violating the 14-day quarantine. I think they've issued only about 100 tickets for people who violated that home quarantine order.
I think Professor Newman is absolutely right in the way he lays out the criteria that have to be looked at. And whether this gets litigated or not, government lawyers will surely be addressing the questions that he mentions. I think what's really crucial in all of this is that typically when a government comes to court and says, we want to defend a law, even though it restricts a right, we want to say that that restriction is reasonable and demonstrably justified. The onus is on the government to prove that. And typically courts want to see evidence. And so, and again, like Professor Newman, I haven't seen the details of this order, and nor am I familiar with all these sort of lines of evidence, of medical evidence, of epidemiological evidence that might be adduced. But surely the government, if it wants to ensure that it doesn't run into trouble prevail in court, it should have a very strong evidentiary basis as to why these measures are needed.